My name is Carolyn Madden, and I am a member of the League of Women Voters of Washtenaw County and the Restorative Justice Committee of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Ann Arbor. I welcome you to the in-person forum featuring Democratic candidates for Washtenaw County Sheriff. This forum is co-sponsored by the League, the Dispute Resolution Center, the Restorative Justice and UU Civs of the First Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Ann Arbor. A minister is here, he's happy for the advertisement. And the Washtenaw County Bar Association. The candidates will be on the ballot in the primary election Tuesday, August 6th. The co-sponsors work to expand voter rights and educate voters. We are a nonpartisan organization and are providing this forum as an opportunity for candidates to express their views related to their candidacy. Statements expressed by the candidates are neither endorsed nor opposed by the League or other forum sponsors. Also, we do not certify any candidate responses to questions as accurate. Voters are encouraged to fact-check information shared at the forum. We bring you tonight's forum because we believe deeply that respectful sharing of views on community issues is vital to the functioning of American democracy. Our moderator this evening is Belinda Doolin, Executive Director of the Dispute Resolution Center. Brenda now will explain the format and get us started.
Thank you, Carolyn. It's my honor to introduce our three candidates running in the August 6th Democratic primary election for the Washtenaw County Sheriff position. Our candidates are Alyshia Dyer, Derrick Jackson, and Ken Magee. I want to thank the candidates for participating in tonight's forum. The forum will follow this format. Each candidate will have an opening statement of up to 90 seconds. I will ask questions which came from the community. Then I will present audience questions to the candidates. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to each question. After the questions, each candidate may make a closing statement of up to 90 seconds. Candidates are to focus on the issues. Personal attacks are not permitted. At appropriate times, a league representative will indicate time remaining, 30 seconds, and then stop. If you have used up your time, you will be allowed to finish your sentence. If you go over your time, you will be asked to stop in fairness to all of the candidates. The candidates will begin speaking in alphabetical order by last name. Each candidate will have an opportunity to be the first or last to answer the question. Following the questions from myself, which will last approximately 30 minutes, we will begin asking written questions from the audience. For our audience members, we have volunteers in the audience who are circulating in the room with note cards and pens. Please write down your questions and give the card to one of our volunteers. In order to ensure fairness, a question must be addressed to all candidates, and all candidates will have a chance to answer the question. I will read the questions from the audience members. If there is more than one question on the same topic, we may combine them, and we cannot guarantee there will be time to ask all questions submitted. Audience members are not permitted to make audio or video recordings of the forum. We will make a full recording of this forum available to the public. Also, please silence your cell phones and other devices now. Thank you for that. I think we're ready to begin with our opening statements. Candidates?
Yeah.
We're now ready for the opening statements, and we'll start with Ms. Dyer.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Alyshia Dyer, and I am running to be the next sheriff of Washtenaw County because I deeply care about protecting our community, children, and workers. I started at the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office many years ago and worked as a road patrol officer for many years, mostly in Ypsilanti Township, but as well as Scioto and Dexter. And that work really showed me how important leadership is when it comes to law enforcement. And the things that I'm running on and the things I'm motivated to change at our Sheriff's Office is I want to end the cooperation with immigration enforcement in our county jail. I want to prioritize officer mental health and wellness. There's a lot of workers at the office that are not being protected and they're responding to mental health calls while they themselves are in a mental health crisis. I want to stop traffic stop ticket quotas and make sure that we are changing the way that we think about traffic enforcement so that way we're not causing unnecessary stress on the workers or the community when it comes to creating high pressure quota systems. The Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office has been arresting black people 11.1 times the rate of white people for nonviolent low-level offenses. I know from working there that this is driven by the reality of our historical injustice in our legal system, but also administrative decisions to use officers as pawns to generate local revenue. And so that is why I care deeply about changing the way we're doing traffic enforcement. And also the sheriff has control over our jail. My goal is to create a jail where education classes aren't getting canceled and we're bringing back in-person jail visitation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson, your state opening.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Derrick Jackson. I am, first of all, very excited to be here. I love when we have conversations like this and can kind of share ideas. It's hard in 90 seconds to tell you about all the things we've done at the Sheriff's Office. I'm a social worker who became a police officer, and for the last 15 years, I've been the Director of Community Engagement at the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office. 22 years, I've had my hands in the soil here in Washtenaw County as a social worker. I started at Ozone House, and I went to work as the Chief Deputy Clerk, running elections for our county, and then this guy named Jerry Clayton was running 16 years ago and came up with this idea that I thought was crazy in the beginning. He said, I hear you, this community guy, what do you think about coming to do what you do in your neighborhood, but do it through a police agency? And it didn't make sense. And I remind people that now, 15 years later, we're often talking about social work and police work going hand in hand, but back when we started talking about this 15 years ago, it was a novelty. And I know in 90 seconds or less, it's hard to get to really explain my entire story, but when I vote for someone, I vote for someone around values. I'm just going to share a couple of quick things in my 30 seconds that I have left. The very first thing I did at the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office when I got hired here was start a street outreach team of individuals who had sent off to the prison who had committed harm in our community, because where I grew up, I knew that those individuals were trusted advisors who would do something different and miraculous in our community. And we've done a lot of great things. I'm not talking about small little policy changes, I'm talking about things that change the soil in Washtenaw County. And so I'm running to build on those things that we've done in the past to hopefully lead us to a brighter future for tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Magee, your opening.
Thank you very much. Ken Magee, born and raised in Ann Arbor, Michigan, Angel, Tappan, and Huron High graduate. Went off to Michigan State, got my degrees in criminal justice, police administration, graduating first in my class. Had a 30-year career in police work afterwards. Why am I running for sheriff? I've seen a lot of changes over the years, and I have 30 years plus experience that I think can make change even better. I've seen some of the things that have occurred in our county. I'm concerned about the opioid overdoses. I'm concerned about the gun violence, and I have strategies to combat both. I'm concerned about some of the things, for example, what Ms. Dyer talked about, marginalization of our youth in regards to traffic enforcement. I've created a plan. It's called traffic education versus traffic enforcement. I know I have a plan that will help individuals in those kinds of situations. So let's talk a little bit more about the background, and that is, I worked overseas as a federal agent for 6 years. I'm a fluent Spanish speaker, which helps in this position as well, being able to communicate with our community of Hispanic speakers. Additionally, when I look at my career, I've been involved in some of the world's greatest cases, from Pablo Escobar to the terrorist attack at the Atlanta Olympics and the bombing. I testified against the Olympic Park bomber. I've taken down an FBI top 10 fugitive, done a lot of things in my career, and I've created a lot of strategies. It hasn't all been enforcement. It's been about drug education and suicide prevention as well, some of the nonprofit organizations I've worked with. We'll get an opportunity to speak more about some of the platform issues. I'm happy to be here and look forward to sharing some of my ideas with you.
Thank you. Thank you all for your opening statement. Okay, right. I think we're ready to get started. Okay, with our questions. And we'll start with Mr. Jackson with the first question. The question is, Michigan law entitles a jailed individual to vote if awaiting trial or awaiting sentencing. What steps would you take to provide such individuals with access to the ballot? How should the department's track record on ballot access be reported to the public?
Yeah, so this is, I mentioned before that I was the director of elections in Washtenaw County, so elections are something that I ran for the entire county that are near and dear to me. So when we came here, one of the things that we did was make sure that those who are incarcerated knew their rights and had access to the ballot. And so oftentimes when I speak, it's not about these lofty promises that as sheriff I would do this. It is about, let's just look at the track record of the things that we have done and how do we evolve it to move forward in the future. So right now in Washtenaw County, those who are incarcerated have access to not just the county clerks to register to vote, to get an absentee ballot, but they also get access to the Secretary of State. We're one of the few counties in Michigan where the Secretary of State's mobile office comes into our jail and provides driver's license, they can renew their registrations. So we give individuals direct access. So we've already been doing that. They get access to the ballot. The one piece that I think we need to improve is, just like we're doing here today, it's one thing to have access to a ballot to vote, but what about the issues that are on the ballot, the individuals that are on the ballot? How do we make sure that we're educating them so that they're educated about what they're actually voting on? So again, I don't even need 2 minutes. I can just say we're already doing it. People do have access to the ballot in Washtenaw County, and we were one of the first counties in Michigan to actually set it up with our county clerk to register and give absentee ballots.
Thank you. Mr. Magee, the same question.
Thank you. I will continue that exact same process. I don't see any reason why we should change it. I think it's important that these individuals have the knowledge that they're able to vote, and I'm all for that, and I will continue to do that. One of the things I will also do is make sure upon entering the jail, the very first thing that they're advised of, along with numerous other things going on within the jail, is their right to vote. And to make sure that we stay on top of that, number one. Number two is make sure our staff is aware of that. So we provide the adequate training to the staff to make sure that they're aware that these individuals ultimately will have the right to vote. And when election time comes, whether it be the 30 days before the election or six weeks before the election, absentee voting, we'll make it work. So I see no reason in changing that, and I will comply with the law 100% because that's what we do in law enforcement, especially as an executive law enforcement leader, comply with the law.
Thank you. And Ms. Dyer, your response.
Yes, as a former officer, but also as a former organizer, this is deeply important to me. And the work that Voting Access Coalition for All VAC does in this arena has been extremely helpful across the state. I support making it easier for people in jail to vote. And what I also think would be really amazing that we could do that would be historical here in Washtenaw County is something that Sheriff Swanson did, where he not only made sure that people had access to the ballot and could vote, he actually had a public forum in the jail. And so being that the sheriff's race will directly impact people that work in the jail from the correction side of things and people formerly incarcerated, I would love to have one of these forums in our county jail. And when people have brought this up in the past, they were told by some of the administrators that it's just really hard to do that and it's not possible, but then Sheriff Swanson did it. And it proved that we can actually do these things. These things are not just hopes and dreams and lofty ideas or goals. These are actionable items that we can implement in our county jail. The other thing I'll say from an implementation standpoint is we need to make sure that our corrections officers are being supported for their mental health and wellness, because if they're not properly trained, if they're working 16 hours back to back to back, everything goes out the window in the jail. Our jail has frequently been going into lockdowns, and the majority of our educational classes in our jail have been canceled. And so there's a lot of infrastructure issues in our jail that we have to focus in on as well. So as sheriff, just to be clear, I will heavily support voting in the jail. I would love to partner with VAC to increase education around voting, as well as do some more work around reentry and in-person jail visitation. And I would love if my opponent, who's currently in the sheriff's administration, I would love to work together with our sheriff's administration now to make a sheriff forum in the jail for this race. I think that would be really historical and be really impactful. Thank you.
Thank you. We will move on to the second question, and we'll start with Mr. Magee. Please describe your experience managing people and budgets, including the number of individuals supervised and the size of the budget overseen.
I started supervising individuals back in the 1990s when I was a backup supervisor in Bogota, Colombia, on the search for Pablo Escobar, the world's most notorious drug lord. Subsequently, I raised through the ranks. I've got well over 25 years in law enforcement executive experience supervising individuals. I've overseen budgets of well over $60, $70 million. I've supervised hundreds of police officers, hundreds of federal agents, to include task force agents spread throughout the world, to include individuals that are local police officers assigned on various law enforcement operations with the DEA and other federal agencies. So when it comes to law enforcement experience, well over 2 decades of leadership. And I think that's extremely important in this position because you need somebody with experience to run a law enforcement agency. And I had that experience because it's not just managing employees, it's coming up with strategies and being creative in regards to what we do to fight crime. Because at the end of the day, our mission is to protect and serve. And there's been way too much crime in Washtenaw County, and I've got solutions to take care of it. I also have the ability to mentor others, and I do that quite frequently, and assemble teams of individuals. And that's where I mastered the ability to not only mentor people, but to build these relationships that we were able to target criminal organizations as well as create strategies to combat crime. So with those leadership qualities and the years that I've been doing it, I know that I'm far above my opponents in regards to this area of expertise. Experience matters. If you don't have experience, and I faced everything from terrorist attacks to shootings to you name it, I've been in the middle of all of it. So I have a hands-on approach from the very lowest level where I've been on the ground to the executive level where I've been able to protect and save lives enormously. Thank you very much. My proudest accomplishment was when I led the organization and worked with the Secret Service to protect President Barack Obama. We supervised over 1,000 police officers on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Magee. Ms. Dyer, your response.
Yeah, so I worked as a road patrol deputy, and I'm the sole candidate in this race that actually worked in operations at the sheriff's office. And I think that is extremely important because you understand how your budget actually plays out. The other big thing I'll say is we need more transparency and accountability at the sheriff's office involving our budget, and I have been working with local community groups to make that happen. I really believe that the portion of our public safety and mental health millage that the sheriff's office gets, it has to be more accountable to the public. And they spent $258,000 to buy rifles and spent money on things that I argue are not in line with community or voters' values around this millage. I do overall support the millage. I just really feel that we need more accountability when it comes to our fiscal spending at the office. I also want to cut down on wasteful spending, especially with training that is very outdated and archaic. They spent thousands on an interrogation tactic, training for it that is not in line with science, and we really need to bring in a finance director at the sheriff's office, given how large this budget is, as well as a grant director. And that grant director can more effectively manage the grants that the sheriff's office gets, as well as bring in new money to the community to really invest in our community, especially prioritizing gender-based violence, corporate accountability crimes, and more front-end prevention programs to support our youth. Also, I'm running a campaign that has a large budget. We, as a grassroots campaign, raised over $140,000. I have 10 staffers, I have 75 volunteers. So I'm doing the work with managing a team now to win this race and then become sheriff. I also recognize I'm not doing this alone, and I will have a whole upper administration at the sheriff's office that I will be bringing in. So my plan is after the primary, starting a hiring committee, bringing in my new administration, as well as policy committees, so that way together we can co-create what our sheriff's office can look like, so we're really improving public safety and reducing harm in our local legal system. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Jackson, your response.
So we currently do have a finance person in the sheriff's office, and we do have someone who is leading our grants work. And I think that that really just speaks to the differences up here as far as someone who's been directing and running the sheriff's office for the last 15 years and who understands that budget inside and out intricately. It's a $60+ million budget, which I think is pretty significant. And I remind some people that when Sheriff Clayton first took office 15 years ago, the Sheriff's Office was in dire straits. It was a debacle. We had a previous sheriff who was over budget by $1.7 billion every year for 7 years in a row. And I tell people, you don't close the jail when you're over budget. You don't send officers home. You simply take resources from other parts of county government that we know are very vital. And so we've not been over budget in the last 15 years one time. In fact, we've given back millions of dollars to the county general fund. So when we talk about these things, it's not, again, hyperbole to say, hey, vote for me because I would do this or I could do this. It's literally about pointing to what we've actually been able to do over the last 15 years. I'll just even go back further though. I was a director at Ozone House, working with young people and homeless kids. When I left Ozone House, we had raised enough money, it was my job, to raise enough money to buy the house that is now in downtown Ypsilanti. So when I left it, we were in a much better financial straits than we were when I took over. When I was at the county clerk's office, it was my job as the chief deputy to help manage that budget, multi-million-dollar budget. When I left, we were in much better financial straits. And here at the Sheriff's Office, I'll give you one real example in my last 30 seconds. Having a Metro Dispatch Center, people see our budget go up. Most, 95% of the calls into dispatch come to the Metro Dispatch Center. Our budget has gone up, but we save $3.5 million a year across the county. Ann Arbor alone saves $1 million by contracting with us. And I could go on if I had more time to talk about all the intricate details of our budget where we have actually saved the county taxpayer dollars. Thank you.
Thank you. We will move to the third question, and we will begin with Ms. Dyer for the third question. 38% of the current community mental health / public safety millage is allocated to the county. Is the county share being spent appropriately? If not, what changes should be made?
I don't believe so. While the current sheriff's administration didn't do anything necessarily illegal with the funds that they received, I don't agree with how they spent the money, and I don't think it's in line with community values. When voters voted for that millage, they wanted it to go to mental health, and we have severe mental health gaps in our county. They did not use a dime of that money to protect the first responders that work for them. We've had officers crash their cars, sleep deprived at work. We have had immense issues with officers struggling with PTSD and a host of other concerns, and this has not been prioritized at all. And then the other thing is they use the money to buy rifles. They use the money to build a mural, an admin wing, and all kinds of things that, again, are not in line with community voters. And my goal as sheriff is to make sure that we're being fiscally responsible with that money, and we're sharing with the people in our community how we're spending that money. I also know that some of that portion is being used to supplement police services for some of our more rural parts of our county. And what I am pledging to do as sheriff is to do an analysis on why our police service unit is so high. And we haven't done this in a long time in this county. It needs to happen because if we can cut the cost of our police service units, we can make it more affordable for some of our local municipalities, so that way we're not using the mental health and public safety millage to subsidize that. And so those are just some of the examples. But the other thing I'll say is it took organizing to even bring any accountability at the sheriff's office level around this millage. And my goal as sheriff is to welcome oversight, to welcome accountability, and to create more transparency so the public knows what is going on. The bare minimum to progressiveness is being transparent and honest. And I do not believe that the sheriff's administration has done an effective job at this, especially when it comes to our public safety and mental health millage. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson, your response?
Yeah, so I have to remind folks that at the same time where around the country people were clamoring to defund police, here in Washtenaw County, our values did something different. We funded mental health and we funded public safety at the same time. And these two things do go hand in hand. There's a reason that that jail across the street is one of the largest mental health institutions in the county. There's a reason that it's one of the largest substance use providers in the county. It shouldn't be that way, but it's one of the largest. Meaning that those populations that we as social workers care so much about are entangled in the criminal justice system. I wish it wasn't that way, but that's a fact. And so I'll just give some facts. $14.3 million went to police service contracts, and I will tell you that if you don't have those police service contracts in the local jurisdictions, let's just say it went away, then guess what has to happen? Those local jurisdictions have to create their own agency or rely on the Michigan State Police or beg the county to now take that money from the general fund. So that millage allows the county to keep their billions in the general fund and use it in very different ways, like the debate right now around affordable housing. Prior to the millage, that money was coming out of the county general fund to the tune of $4 million a year. Imagine Ypsi Township creating their own police agency. Now they have their own retirement, longevity, hire their own officers. The same things that we've been doing regionally here in Washtenaw County to save that money, like around dispatch, the example I gave. Imagine doing the opposite and walking backwards and having these small local agencies now. $5.3 million to diversion, deflection, and reentry services. So when we say we haven't spent this money on mental health around diversion, deflection, reentry, it's just not accurate. We haven't done the best job in talking about it. It's a complex millage, but I would tell you that we are one of the premier law enforcement agencies, not only in the state. People from around the country come to see what we do in that jail and on the road and how we do it. Why? Because the millage allows us and gives us the resources to put a social worker and a police officer in a car, to have a 24/7 crisis line in Washtenaw County.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Mr. Magee, your response.
Let me start by saying I'm all for the community mental health millage, period, 100%. But like Kennedy Dyer, I see concerns in regards to the way the money has been spent. But this gets down to the core thing when I talk about one of my platform issues, accountability and transparency. One of the things Kennedy Dyer talked about was pushing to try and get all the information out, exactly what was going on with the community mental health money. And it was hard to locate that information. And there's a reason why, for example, Ypsilanti Township right now has been studying getting their own police department. And why? Because it deals with accountability and transparency. When I'm sheriff, all this information will be available immediately. Accountability and transparency, it won't require FOIA requests or anything like that, which are costly to consumers and citizens and people that just want to learn what's going on at the sheriff's department. So that information will be readily available to anyone who wants to see it. So accountability and transparency is huge, and that's one of the reasons a lot of people are talking about what's going on with this community mental health millage money. The next thing is the public police service units. When we talk about the police service units and paying almost $180,000 a year for a deputy, a lot of the townships have their concerns about that. And some of the townships and some of the municipalities are saying, give us an exact breakdown on how that money is spent. So dangling the carrot in front of them of community mental health, that their police services are going to go away if the community mental health program goes away, I think that's disingenuous, and we shouldn't treat our out-county residents and political leaders that way. It's a scare tactic and it's fear mongering. And that's the way I look at things when it comes to community mental health millage. Do I believe we need it? Absolutely. In conclusion, I spoke earlier, part of my community mental health millage will be used not for some of the things that Ms. Dyer spoke about that were going on, but to take this jail of ours and reorganize the jail the way it is laid out and have a substance use recovery unit within the jail so that those individuals serving time for other crimes can get additional help that they need right when they're incarcerated. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Magee. The next question will be the last prepared question, and then we'll transition to the audience questions. So, Mr. Jackson, starting with you, please give us an example of a difficult personal or professional decision you made because of a core value that you hold.
Without a doubt, I think if you look back, there are two things that I can say. When I first started the street outreach team, the first person I hired was someone we sent to San Quentin prison for 15 years. And imagine the new director at the sheriff's office coming in with someone. I had this value that I know that those closest to the problem are always closest to the solution. I grew up in a neighborhood, and when people look at me now, they say this is not possible, but it's true. But the dope man lived across the street from me, and I grew up wanting to be like the dope man. Never thought about going to college. Why? Because he had the nicest house. He had the nicest car. I was a fast track runner, so he made sure I stayed out of trouble. I wanted to be like him. So if he told me not to do something, I didn't do it. If he asked me to do something, I did do it. Those closer to the problem are closer to the solution. But I'll give you one that I will never forget. Some people tried to get me fired over this. There was a young man that I mentored. He got into an altercation. One of the friends he was with shot at someone. They dropped the gun. The young man that I know picked the weapon up, and he was running. And our officers caught up to two of the individuals, and this young man is off in the woods somewhere. He's hiding out. I show up to the scene. They say, Derrick, you know all the kids in the neighborhood. You know this kid. I'm like, absolutely, I know him. I know where he lives. helicopters overhead, canines chasing him through the woods. I call him, and guess what he does? He picks up the phone. Why? Because of the relationship, because of the trust. We go over there, we make the arrest. Long story short, he tells everything that happens to him. They're going to throw the book at him. And I read a letter. And I knew that for some, they would hate the idea of me writing a letter. But I wrote the letter and I asked the judge, I said, Judge, I know he's done something really horrible. But I hope at 16 years old, you don't throw him, at 17 years old, you don't throw him under the jail. And I got backlash for it. I got backlash from the prosecutor for it. But I could look myself in the mirror and say that I saw value in that young person. And even though there was pushback from some people, I stood by my principle-based decision that was supported by the sheriff and some other folks internally. But that was probably one of the biggest internal issues that I had that really, I think, gave me courage to say, like, this is my values and I'm sticking by it.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Mr. Magee?
And that example right there, an individual takes shots at police officers. I have a problem with that. And so does every law enforcement officer that works in Washtenaw County. And that's one of the reasons why law enforcement officers are leaving Washtenaw County. We're down almost 40 officers starting January 1st of next year. It's horrible. That's almost half the staff. We have a law enforcement crisis we're facing. Let me tell you about a personal decision. When I was a police chief, I received information that one of my officers had a cocaine problem. I did not investigate it. I turned it over to the state police and said, I don't want to know anything until you've completed your investigation. Sure enough, this officer was caught coming out of a crack house in Ypsilanti, possession of cocaine. I went and saw him that night in jail, took his badge, took his gun, told him to report in the morning. He reported in the morning. I ordered a drug test. Of course, it came back positive. I fired him. He came in, saw me crying, saying his mother's disowned him. And I told him, as much as I love you, and much as I care about you as a human being, I cannot have a police officer who has a cocaine problem work for me. I lost a brother to a drug overdose. I'm very compassionate, work very hard mentoring young people that have substance use disorders and things of that nature. But that decision was a very hard decision. I saw my brother in him. I saw my mother in his mother. But I stuck to my guns and I told him, I will try and find you another job, but it can't be as a law enforcement officer. So was it difficult? Yes. Was it the right decision? Absolutely. And that's what you need in law enforcement. People that make the decisions, that won't compromise their values, and that the law enforcement leaders around you respect, number one. And number two, those law enforcement officers that work for you respect. Every officer respected me for that decision, no matter how much he was loved. So those are the kind of hard decisions we make, but I know I made the right decision. And I also know that the most important thing as a law enforcement leader is to have the respect of your troops. If not, it doesn't matter what your message is, you will not succeed.
Thank you, Mr. Magee. Ms. Dyer?
Yeah, for me, the hardest decision that I've made lately was leaving the sheriff's office and running for sheriff. This was not an easy decision. I am well aware I'm going against the status quo at the sheriff's office and a lot of power. I could talk about the attacks that me and my team have gone through all day. This has not been easy, but I know I'm doing the right thing because when I was working at this office, I saw so many young people in our community that grew up so similar to me in Ypsilanti area, lower income families, raised by single parent households, constantly being criminalized by our local legal system. There were young people that I was mentoring as an officer that are now dead because of the actions of this county involving our local legal system, as well as a host of other realities of injustice in our county. And I'm going to give you one example of this. One of the young people that I knew got in trouble first at a really young age because he stole a package off someone's front doorstep when he was in middle school. This young person never got off probation and ended up getting involved in detention, then ended up breaking into houses, then behavior escalated, started carrying a gun. Next thing you know, he's involved in gun violence. And this happened all the time. I saw it happening as an officer. When I tried to get the sheriff's administration to give a damn, they didn't. They were not there for the funerals. They were not there responding to these homicides, seeing the hurt and the pain going through these families' lives. And children in our county are constantly being criminalized. Black children in 2017 were 8 times more likely to go to jail or be arrested. Now it's 11 times. It's getting worse. We have to have leadership that's willing to make the hard decisions and do what's right to protect people in our county, not to criminalize people. I also saw this happening with mental health. I saw this happening with poverty. I saw moms using their tax refund to pay off the court because they were getting stopped so much for low-level offenses. And so I know what I'm doing is worth it, but this is definitely a very hard decision I made. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dyer. We're going to transition to the audience questions, and the first one is this, and I'll begin with Mr. Magee on this question. What would you concretely do to reduce the disproportionate arrest and pullover rates of minorities, especially black individuals in Washtenaw County?
Well, number one is there were no ticket quota. It goes away. If there is a ticket quota, it goes away, number one. Number two is I spoke about my idea of traffic education versus traffic enforcement, where those tickets go away as long as you take a short online course and you're not a reoffender. But I would also study the statistical data. I understand that racism and bias-based policing has no place in society today, nor has it or should it have ever. I'm a firm believer. I studied Dr. Martin Luther King. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. It's been on my stationery for years. It's something I live by. So when I look at the idea of what you're speaking about in regards to the disproportionate amount of individuals that have been pulled over in traffic stops, I want to study the data. I want to study all the data and make sure that my officers and my supervisors know exactly what my mission is. And that is no racial-based policing will be tolerated under my administration. I have experience in this. I have experience in studying it. I have created policy. I have experience in enforcing it as well. I've had experience in enforcing officers that have utilized racist comments. And I have a problem with that. Under my leadership, it won't happen. The most important thing that I say that a law enforcement leader can ever do, the two most important decisions is, number one is who they hire, and number two is who they promote. And once you've made that decision, who you hire and who you promote, from that point on, anything you say to them is your mission statement. And racial profiling will be one of my missions to prevent from occurring underneath my administration. And that's all dependent on the people I hire, because I know they're going to respect me, because I've been in their position. I've been in the belly of the beast and I've slayed the dragon. They will respect me, and they will understand that these are my marching orders, and that's exactly the way I'm going to handle that situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Dyer, same question.
For me, I firmly believe that we need to get rid of the traffic stop and ticket quotas that are often put in at the sheriff's office that creates a really high pressure system for a lot of the younger officers especially. When I was working at the sheriff's office, I was doing events in the park. I was doing carpool karaoke where I would bring a microphone into work and have young people hang out in the park and sing. I was doing walking programs. I was never evaluated for that work though. Instead, I was evaluated for how many tickets, traffic stops, and arrests I was making. And when you as an administrator evaluate your employees on these punitive metrics, it really motivates them to increase over policing. And so one of my big priorities is getting rid of those evaluation metrics, which do create an informal traffic stop and ticket quota system. And then I want to stop low-level traffic stops. I was an allyship with, I bring this up a lot, Councilmember Cynthia Harrison did work on this in Ann Arbor and got an Ann Arbor traffic stop equality ordinance passed. I heavily support that and would be motivated to adopt something similar at the sheriff's office because traffic stops are dangerous. And I don't think anybody loves getting pulled over. And we know that traffic stops, even if nothing bad happens, it can cause trauma for people. And so what we have in Washtenaw County and what the reality that a lot of people in eastern Washtenaw County are going through is 86% of the revenue generated by the 14B court is from fines and fees. So we have to do more to make sure we're reducing unnecessary contact with law enforcement through traffic stops. I also support better training. When I was in the training at the sheriff's office, I had one of the officers say, if you see a white girl and a black guy in a car, that's a good stop. These are things that officers are saying. And so we have to do better to train and to stop that behavior from happening, because you can't say we have a progressive training program and then that stuff happens. I also want to end cooperation with ICE in our county jail, which also creates disparities.
We have to stop you.
Thank you.
Ms. Dyer.
Sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson, same question.
Just for the record, quotas in Michigan are illegal. We don't have quotas at the sheriff's office. I'll point to a couple of facts, and getting pulled over is horrible, right? You don't have to take my word for it. Go to the data and information dashboard. All of our data is public. You can do it on your phone right now or when you get home, right on the sheriff's office website. 27,000 traffic stops in Washtenaw County in 2023. 23,000 of them were warnings, so that's about 14%, which were citations. Of black folks in Washtenaw County, roughly 9,000 traffic stops, 8,000 were warnings, it's about 11%. In Ipsy Township, which is one of our blackest, brownest communities, 6,600 stops, 5,500 warnings, so about 12%. So again, I think we're absolutely right to have this conversation, and we have to really look at it. So one of the things, a part of my platform is a transparency project where we look at the data and see about the disproportionate contact. But we also got to start from facts, not just made up, but actual facts. I think the other thing, and we've done this, but it's also really important to highlight, what's the reason for these minor level traffic stops, these pretext stops? It's because an officer wants to get in there to find guns and dope and they want to search your vehicle. We changed our consent search policy, which means, not to get into the weeds, but it means that I can't even ask you as an officer to search your vehicle unless there's some evidentiary reason. So running a stop sign does not mean I need to search your vehicle. A tassel in your rearview mirror does not mean I need to search your vehicle. I can't even ask you anymore to do that. That is directly reduce the number of these small level pretext stops. I've said it before, I'll say it again. It's in my platform to reduce minor level stops. But that'll be done. Jerry Clayton has talked about that being done before he walks out of office. But it is something that we have to do. So I think those are the things. Start with the facts. Train our deputies better. And also know that in Washtenaw County, we have made progress, but I wouldn't be up here if I thought we were perfect. We still got a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question from the audience will begin with Ms. Dyer. What is your position on providing the support of a mental health specialist for police calls?
Yeah, and just real quick, we have evidence to back up what we're saying. And we have proof that the Sheriff's Administration has been pressuring workers to make traffic stops. With mental health response, I firmly believe that we really need to make sure we're investing in countywide unarmed community response like other areas have done across our country, because honestly, officers don't have the training, the tools, or the ability at times to properly respond to mental health calls. And I support programs like Cahoots, which is in Oregon, where they have been in operation for decades. And what they have shown is when community responders respond to mental health calls, it increases safety for the public. It relieves the burden on law enforcement to have to be the #1 responders to it. And in less than 2% of the situations did the calls have to get referred to the police. And so I heavily support making sure that we are investing in that in Washtenaw County. It's a huge gap. And also we need to just support holistic mental health services more broadly, because there are people that, for example, at Community Mental Health, they can only get therapy for 8 sessions. My day job now, I work as a therapist. We have to do better in this arena to make sure that we are supporting people with mental health issues, not just throwing the police at the problem or throwing the police at them. I also believe that the officers internally need mental health support. I will bring in peer-led mental health services for the officers, because they are operating oftentimes in high-stress situations, and it benefits nobody to have officers out here working the streets with a gun on their hip, sleep-deprived with PTSD. So we have to make sure we prioritize that, because as sheriff, you can throw all the progressive training at officers you want, but nothing is going to change if they feel like crap, if they're not taking care of themselves, and if they aren't being supported by the current administration. Thank you.
Mr. Jackson, same question.
So I love this question because this really has been my job, right? Like people see me on television talking about the bad stuff that happens in our county, but I'm really behind the scenes the architect that has been able to deconstruct the system and put it back together in different ways. So let me give you just some of the mental health training that we created here in Washtenaw County is now the required training for every single police academy recruit across the state of Michigan. I'll say that again. The training that started here around mental health to help officers understand how to deal with individuals on the street is now required at every police academy across the state of Michigan. The 24/7 crisis line that you can call today instead of calling 911, that was created for the sheriff's office deputies. It works so well for a deputy to be able to just call a social worker 24/7, 365, that then we decided that needs to be a county-wide number, not just for law enforcement. The co-response unit with a social worker and a police officer in the car together that is happening right now in MC Township, and in June or July it's going to go live countywide. That is happening right now. Sometimes you need a social worker to step up, sometimes a police officer. Something called LEAD, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion and Deflection. I'm an officer who's dealt with you 6, 7, 8 times because of mental illness or addiction. Well, guess what? On that 8th or 9th time, I can say, instead of arresting you, so in lieu of arrest on the street, can I call a social worker, and are you willing to talk with them? And if you are, that minor level, minimal incident goes away. We created something called We Live, which is about violence retaliation prevention. We take folks who've been violently injured, we train them, we hire them, we send them into the hospital, not to solve the case. We got detectives solving those crimes at rates of 85, 86%. But individuals who can work on the fear, anger, and trauma that we know breeds retaliation. 80 to 85% of the shootings in our county are retaliatory in nature. And so we can do both. You can change the soil, you can hold people accountable, you can provide off-ramps all at the same time. So when you think about how you provide those services, it is about officer wellness, and we already are providing a lot of those services.
Thank you. Mr. Magee, your response?
Thank you. I'm going to stay on track and answer the question. And the question was about social workers and police response. Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what we'll do. We'll make sure that the training is done. We'll make sure that the money is in place. And we'll make sure that social workers and police officers are teamed up to be able to respond to certain things. We've all seen the tragedies on TV. We all know what's out there. We all see the community mental health aspect of things are escalating tremendously. Yes, of course, we're going to have social workers that are going to respond with police officers and work very closely. Additionally, training will be extremely important because we can't have a social worker in every police car. We'll continue to do the training. My opponent spoke earlier about the state of Michigan having mental health training that was developed right here at Washtenaw County. That is the same program that makes millions of dollars as a private company, a for-profit company. And I have a problem with that as well because that material belongs to Washtenaw County and not to the possession of anybody else. That money should go directly back to Washtenaw County when utilize training for mental health that was developed here in Washtenaw County, and we give it to somebody else to make millions of dollars, and my opponent is part of that. And I don't agree with that 100%, and I will change that immediately. We will still comply and get mental health training as much as we can. But those are some of my concerns that I have when we talk about community mental health training developed right here in the Sheriff's Department. Are we saving lives by putting social workers in cars? That's yet to be determined. I'm sure it will have some impact. I don't know how much impact because we have so many problems with community mental health out there. But one of the things I can assure you is that every program will be looked at. We're going to look at effectiveness with science-based research. We're going to study what other communities have done. I know about the Cahoots program over in Eugene, Oregon, as well as Candidate Dyer and some of the other organizations and nonprofit organizations that are teaming up with law enforcement. But what we need to do right here in Washtenaw County is to make sure we keep our eye on the prize and remember what our goal is. Stay in our lane as a law enforcement agency and make sure that we get the community mental health training that we can and get it out to the people. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question, we'll start with Mr. Jackson. How do you plan to lessen gun violence in Washtenaw County?
This is hard in 2 minutes. You know, a couple of weeks ago we had the Community Violence Intervention Summit here in Washtenaw County. Roughly 350 people from around our community coming to learn about gun violence. Now we are a very safe, relatively safe community here in Washtenaw. Of the 13 zip codes in Washtenaw County, 8 or 9 of them haven't had a street level interpersonal homicide. So for some in this room it may not make sense, but the ripple effects of gun crimes and homicide in Washtenaw County are huge. So here's what we did. I mentioned the We Live. We started really looking at what's the real problem. Some of these state laws that are around extreme risk protection orders, safe storage, they're great, but they don't actually get at the root cause of street level interpersonal violence. So we looked at that. We brought together a group as a community group. I just happened to be the person they asked to facilitate them, called the Community Violence Intervention Team. There's millions of dollars that are flooding into communities to help do this work. So when people talk about alternative responders, we have local interventionists, people from community, from neighborhoods, who are trained, who are ready, who are already out there working to squash the beef, to be in the hospitals, like I mentioned, at their bedside, to hopefully deal with retaliatory violence. And this isn't just some sob story or, again, some political thing that I'm trying to sell here. It's actually working. There are 53 survivors that have been stabbed or shot that we've worked with in our We Live program. 51 of them have not retaliated. It's not perfect. You're talking about serious issues, but this is one way that we start to really wrap our hands around. The Community Violence Intervention Team, community members, along with the Sheriff's Office, came up with 14 recommendations. And if we do these 14 things, we believe we can have a real impact. The proof is still out there to see if it's gonna be effective. But one of them that the kids have always asked me to talk about was we need a community center on the eastern side of Washtenaw County. We've had all kind of iterations of it. It's different this time because now we've tied it to public safety, not just playing with kids, it's about keeping kids alive.
Thank you. We have to stop you there. And Mr. Magee.
Thank you. Gun violence is an all-time high here in Washtenaw County, 22 deaths last year. That says a lot. We've talked about these programs that have been created. Haven't seen the statistics yet, but so far people are still getting killed. I've had a career of creating crime-fighting strategies on the East Coast, on the West Coast, South America, foreign countries, and right here in Detroit, Michigan, as well as Ann Arbor. I've done a great job at creating crime-fighting strategies. I want you to take a look at things. For example, domestic violence, up 500% deaths in the last several years. That's horrible. Where's the training when it comes to that, number one? Number two is, we talk about some of the programs that have been created already here in Washtenaw County. What we don't have is crime-fighting strategies. People are tired of crime. They're tired of being victimized. And where is holding people accountable? For example, carrying guns. Where are we holding them accountable if they're caught carrying a weapon illegally? And we clamor, we talk about gun violence, but we let people off carrying weapons with a slap on the wrist or simple probation or please don't do it again. I have my concerns about that. And as a law enforcement leader, guns are what's killing people. And when we're giving people a pass who are carrying guns, I have concern. I want to create multi-jurisdictional task forces with alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, and other agencies, law enforcement agencies, that equally are concerned about the gun violence that we have right here in our community. Recently, $1.2 million was granted to a group of individuals that were convicted felons, but representatives from the domestic violence world were left in the dark. They weren't given any money, and several other science-based research programs were left out in the cold. And $1.2 million, I think how much of that money could have gone to programs that would have actually stopped gun violence right then and there, instead of entrusting a convicted murderer and a convicted pedophile in hold of $1.2 million. Do I think they're going to commit crimes again? I don't think so. But I don't think I want to invest my time and money in that operation right now when we've got other people dying.
Thank you, Mr. Magee.
Thank you.
Ms. Dyer, same question.
Yeah, preventing gun violence is extremely important for me, and I support the work that's going on with community violence intervention. I was also at the summit, and what I think is really important that we have to do as a county, that I will definitely prioritize as sheriff, is we have to make sure our victims' compensation funds at the state level are getting into this county. There are many times that people will apply for these funds and they'll get denied, and I have been with mothers on scenes where they're trying to figure out how to pay for a funeral cost and going into debt to be able to provide for their family, and really impacted by gun violence. I lost young people in our county because of gun violence, and what I saw, it's not politically popular to say this, but the truth is we are criminalizing childhood in Washtenaw County. That is where the street level gun violence is starting from. When you talk about root causes, when you throw a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, a 12-year-old in our legal system and they never get out, the behavior escalates. I saw it happen all the time. And the young people we were able to completely deflect out of our system, where we were able to use restorative justice, where we were able to get them support, they grew out of the behavior that they were doing that was causing them to get in trouble in the first place. I was a young person growing up in poverty. I was a juvenile runaway. I went through a lot growing up, and if I was arrested one time, I would not be here today running for sheriff. And so the reality is we have to stop criminalizing childhood. And then as sheriff too, I want to share the data with everybody so everyone knows where the guns are coming from that are used in gun violence. And we have to prioritize domestic violence, which a lot of gun violence is also attributed to. That's not looked at enough. And largely ignored, and so I really want to make sure we prioritize that, and I will start doing that with our detective bureau, as well as, again, making sure that we get survivors funding for things that happen after the fact, and we're doing better to close cases and investigate before the fact. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dyer. We have a few more questions from the audience, and the next one will start with Mr. Magee. It's a two-part question. Will you cooperate with ICE? Under what circumstances?
One of the things I'm going to make clear is I do not want our deputies enforcing immigration laws. That's not their job. Title VIII's not their job. We're not going to have them do it, nor can they, nor should they. Nor should they be able to ask somebody for their naturalization papers or their citizenship status. That won't happen under my watch. Now, the question, will I cooperate with ICE? Will I communicate with ICE? We've had this question asked in numerous forums, and the answer is yes. But let me qualify the answer yes, and that is this. If ICE comes to town and is going to do a search warrant, for example, to take undocumented individuals that have warrants for their arrest or for human trafficking, drug dealing, I don't know exactly what, but if they come to town and we ignore them and we've set the precedent that we're not going to deal with ICE and there's a shooting in the community, I think that will be a very tragic situation. Why? We're sending deputies to that scene to all of a sudden back up ICE. We need to know when somebody's doing an enforcement operation in our community. They will come here. Bottom line, they're going to come here. I'm not saying that we're arresting people with them. I'm not saying that we're going to check green cards, things of that nature. I have a daughter. She's Hispanic. She never had a green card. Her mother had a green card. And I would be terrified if my wife, former wife, was in a situation where her green card was checked while we were driving down the road. It just isn't going to happen, and it's not legal, number one. But number two is, if you say that you're not going to coordinate with ICE, period, that's it. You're doing a disservice. And it's thousands of investigations that I've been involved in, thousands, where I've seen the importance of law enforcement agencies communicating with each other. And I see it, it's taught at the FBI Academy, every single police academy. You need to communicate, you need to coordinate. So if they're going to do something here in our community and we don't know about it and somebody gets hurt, and it couldn't just be a police officer, it might be a member of the society, or it might be an undocumented individual. I have my concerns about that. So yes, I hope I've qualified exactly how my operations will work with ICE.
Thank you.
I do not support cooperating with ICE, and my goal as sheriff is to end the cooperation with ICE. I have been getting attacked on this a lot because my main opponent keeps lying to the public about what we do and don't do with immigration enforcement. And so what I'll say is, in the current sheriff's office policy, while it does prevent officers from asking about immigration status on traffic stops, it is a very low bar. We are still cooperating with ICE in our county jail on voluntary detainers. Voluntary detainers are immigration holds, and they're simply requests from ICE. They're not valid judicial warrants. What is happening is the policy that my opponent crafted at the sheriff's office right now, what it does is it has a number of exceptions and loopholes, which A, run risk of mistakes, but B, still allows for cooperation with ICE in our county jail. This puts the whole immigrant community at risk, and it's not in line with our values in this county. The other thing we're doing to cooperate with ICE in our county jail is we are turning over information to them by participating in what is called the CAP program. And there are other sheriffs across the country that have stopped this. It is entirely possible, and I will be doing this as sheriff, to end cooperation with ICE in our county jail as well as traffic stops. And then here's the other thing about the raids. I was a deputy during the Trump administration when ICE was conducting raids, and there was someone in administration that had to call me because they were worried that children were going to get home from school and their parents were going to be gone. And they sent our SWAT team out with ICE. They also sent deputies out with ICE while gaslighting the immigrant communities and telling them we don't cooperate with ICE. So my goal is to be honest about this and to make sure that we are implementing best practice policy, which I have a draft policy here if anybody wants to talk about it or review it, and make sure that what we are doing is truly keeping immigrant communities safe in our county. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson?
So some of these questions are really difficult to answer in 2 minutes. There's a video that I put out on our campaign page. I would encourage you to watch it, and hopefully we did an immigration forum that they will release the video and you can kind of see this entire conversation in detail. One of the first policies I was asked to work on was the immigration policy. And again, talking about my values, the very first thing I did was reach out to some of the immigrant rights activists in our community and ask them to come around the table and help us to develop the policy. So the current policy in place was co-created. People may not agree now, 15 years later, with all the language, but it was co-created with community. And it is not just our policy, it's the policy of every single police agency in the county. Before the policy, law enforcement in Washtenaw County could enforce immigration. Before the policy, we could ask for your status on a traffic stop. We can no longer do that. Before the policy, we could ask if you were a victim of a crime, what your immigration status was. We can no longer do that. When you're in the jail, anyone in this room can get access to the list of everyone who's in the jail. ICE gets access to that list because it's the public list. I really think it's important that we be clear and honest with folks what's actually happened around immigration enforcement and what's not happening. There was a book written on the ICE raid that was alluded to like 12 years ago, and trust me, if there was another raid that was done in those last 12 years, Dr. Williams would have probably wrote another book. We don't do ICE raids. We should make that very clear to the undocumented community in Washtenaw County that we're not doing that. The last part I'll say about this is, I've already said, and I will continue to say, that 15 years in, I am not the sheriff, although hopefully with your votes I will be. There are things that there are limitations around what I've done and what I would do differently. And the exception to the rule, if you're in our jail and you have a violent offense, that is the one exception where we can make sure that ICE is a safe transfer to ICE. I would change that. So again, we have what we have now. I'm not the sheriff. And that one exception, I would change.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Our next question will begin with Ms. Dyer. Washtenaw County has a reputation as an open-air drug market. What will your administration do to correct this perception and keep illegal drugs out of our communities?
So I firmly believe that we are not ever going to arrest our way out of the war on drugs. We're not going to arrest our way out of gun violence. What we can do is we can make sure that people have the support and services they need. I have been a former student with Students for Sensible Drug Policy. I have publicly spoke at Hash Bash. I have talked about how our culture around the drug war has caused immense harm in communities. We have to make sure that we increase treatment options, that we increase naloxone. I think that one of the best health measures that was done locally is making sure that there's naloxone everywhere for people that need it, because I used that when I was on patrol to save people's lives, and it really makes a huge difference. There are so many people, there's probably everyone in this room has been impacted by this in some form or fashion, whether they knew a loved one, were personally impacted by it. Officers have got on pain pills when they've got their shoulder injured or something happened at work and they've had trouble getting off of them. And the stigma around talking about this and criminalizing it is only making it worse. And so my goal as sheriff is to make sure that a lot of the educational classes and treatment classes that are offered when we can't avoid it and someone ends up in our jail, that they're not being canceled like they are now often, but also making sure that we have more front-end prevention treatment options. And I especially support making sure that those treatment options are available for young people. And I worked at Dawn Farm for my internship when I was in the social work program. And one of the big barriers to getting into treatment is if you have warrants, it's hard to get a bed or get housing. And so I will, as sheriff, be partnering with a lot of local people doing this work to make sure we can eliminate some of the barriers that the criminal justice causes for people to actually get the treatment they need to, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson, your response?
And this is what I mean by changing the soil. If we continue to simply rely on police to respond to these small symptoms, and we refuse to invest in community in ways that really deal with the root causes, we will constantly over-rely on policing to deal with things that they're really not meant to deal with. Which again is why that building behind you is full of individuals who really suffer from substance use disorder. There's a laundry list of things that I can run down of what we're doing differently in the jail to make sure someone gets into treatment. You know, there's a large majority of African American and people of color who get into treatment. Unfortunately, they get into treatment at that jail. We need to change that. And that doesn't get changed by a police agency. That gets changed by saying this is an issue and raise it as an issue and holding those nonprofits and human services accountable, but also being willing to invest in those community resources. So one of the biggest things that I talk about is justice reinvestment. If we continue to wait until the end downstream to invest in folks like policing strategies, we will never get our way out of these very difficult issues. I'll give you an example. When we started looking, we talked about violence earlier, at some of our shooters, those who had pulled the trigger, we hired someone, an epidemiologist who studies diseases, and we looked at crime as a disease. What she found was those who pulled the trigger, many of them grew up, one of their first interactions with police was because they were in a household full of domestic violence or serious aggravated assaults. What about if we start to deal with that at 4 years old versus when they were 14, 15, 16 years old? And I know it's not directly related to addiction, but it's a prime example of how we need to reinvest dollars upstream. I'm running for sheriff, not for small policy level changes. I've been running through what we've been doing all night tonight, and I'm here to tell you, this doesn't cut it. This is not what's going to change the soil in Washtenaw County. I want to be sheriff to hold us all as a county accountable to push these kinds of conversations forward. Otherwise, that jail will stay full of people with mental illness, addiction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Mr. Magee, your response.
Leadership 101, you have to be present. I have over 25 years in combating narcotics law enforcement. But along the lines of all those years, I also know that we won't wrest our way out of the situation. I've been saying that for decades. I have often said, we will never win the war against drugs, but we will win every battle we choose to fight. So how do we fight those battles? The question dealt with Washtenaw County being an open air market for narcotics trafficking. It is. They operate with impunity. They don't really feel that they're going to be held accountable. So I've created an acronym, it's called PETER. This is to take a look at the whole problem, 360 approach. I mentioned earlier, my brother died of a drug overdose. I mentioned earlier that I've got so much experience in drug prevention as well as suicide prevention. PETER, the acronym, stands for Prevention, Enforcement, Treatment, Education, and Recovery. And you take those 5 components, and this is all on my website, you can learn more about it. But we take a look at each one of them. Prevention is not education. Education is letting the individuals know in our community that we have a serious drug problem, as well as the council members and commissioners and elected officials. They need to know, and they need to put dollars into fighting the problem through prevention, enforcement, treatment, education, and recovery. But one thing I do believe in, although I want to take part of the jail and turn it into a recovery unit, there's no question about it. I want to stop prosecuting people with low-level drug possession crimes. But one of the things I do believe is drug violence and gun violence goes hand in hand. So when the current state of narcotics enforcement in Washtenaw County is that there's no one doing it except for the Michigan State Police, and right now Washtenaw County refuses to work with the Michigan State Police on the drug issues. I have my concerns about that. It's an open air market. Yes, it is. And we've had over 500 people die in a little more than a half a decade. Over 500 people. And that's got to stop. And with a full 360 approach like I've just laid out, it will stop.
Thank you. The next question will be our last question for tonight. And we will begin with Mr. Jackson. If elected, what is your short-term strategy to restore trust in the sheriff's office, and specifically to repair damage done during the campaign?
I don't think there is a short-term strategy, right? For 15 years, we've been working to build trust, not just in these kind of small conversations, not one-offs, but we do intimate conversations, 5 officers, 5 kids from the neighborhood, just because, and we buy dinner and we just have a conversation. We do these larger, what are called impact sessions, 30 officers, 30 community members working on solutions. We do basketball programs, something we've been doing since my Ozone days, called Ballin' in the Willow, where there are officers and kids playing basketball together. We do preventative programming. We hire people from community. We're one of the only places in county government that will actually hire folks from community that have a criminal history. We're doing all these things. And then when things happen 1,000 miles away and you take 2 steps back, we know this is not an end game. We don't cross the finish line. It is a constant push and struggle to always build trust. And so I don't think there is a quick short-term solution. It's the philosophy and how you treat people. And again, there's not a lot of directors of community engagements in the entire country. This has been my job for 15 years, is to understand the science behind these things and to put all these cogs in the wheel in place to push this forward. I'm going to tell you that I was raised in a community where we had a horrible relationship with police. In 2006, when I lived in West Willow, one of my neighbors was in handcuffs by the sheriff's deputies of the agency that I now help to run, and he died in their custody. I was the person that my neighbors asked to come speak to that sheriff back then and convince him to come to a neighborhood watch meetings, and he simply said no. I never forgot what that felt like. I never forgot the tension in that community. And one of the reasons I came to the sheriff's office is because I promised his family that his life would not be in vain. So I don't run for sheriff out of some ego, perceived power, or because I want extra money. I run because these wounds that have shaped me in my entire life are deep. They're part of my DNA. And so I want to be sheriff to make sure those things don't happen in the future.
Mr. Magee, same question.
Could you repeat the question? You faded out the last couple words of it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'll make sure I remember the mic better. If elected, what is your short-term strategy to restore trust in the sheriff's office, and specifically to repair damage done during the campaign?
When elected sheriff, one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to speak to every single employee at the sheriff's department. I'm going to listen to them. It's going to be a listening tour within the sheriff's department. As opposed to getting calls from employees at the sheriff's department now, I'm going to set up appointments with every single one. That's number one. I'm going to continue my community listening tour to hear exactly what they want, what the community wants and needs. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure every single employee knows my mission, my value statement, and each area that I've spoke about in my platform as to what I expect. I think it's extremely important to be a present leader, and a leader who is hands-on, be able to speak to his employees and be there. Not be an absentee sheriff, but a hands-on leader. And I've said this over the years, as I've seen things evolve here at Washtenaw County. I seriously believe the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Department has become more of a political organization as opposed to a law enforcement agency. And law enforcement agencies do get involved with community engagement. They do drug prevention, and they work with kids in the street, and they do all sorts of things. But the Sheriff's Department has lost its focus, and we're losing the employees because of that. As I said earlier, employees are fleeing the department to go to different places. And that is a serious concern that everyone in this room should think about. So my goal is to restore the trust within the Sheriff's Department, that the Sheriff's Department employees know that they have the trust of the leadership, and that I will hold them accountable, but I will also make sure that my mission statement is very, very clear in their minds. So, in conclusion, the way I look at it is your leader has to be present, your leader has to be effective, and your leader has to have the respect of the employees. I know, as I said earlier, I've been in the belly of the beast. Cops, the entity of a law enforcement agency, is different than any other agency. They look at leadership, what have you done, and how well did you do it, and can you lead us? That's the way a general works in the Army, and that's the way I'll run as a sheriff to make sure that my folks respect me and do the job we ask them to do. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Dyer, same question.
Yeah, restoring trust for me is number one, telling the truth. We have had, my opponent has lied about policies with the public for a long time. It took 3 public forums and a ton of pressure to even get them to admit something close to the truth. And a lot of employees at the sheriff's office are watching the administrators. They're also seeing my opponent actively campaign while he's working. They're seeing him campaigning while he's wearing a police uniform even though he's never policed. This is eroding trust in the department. The last thing we want is officers doing the same thing out in the community. We do not want our officers getting engaged in politics while they're working. So part of building trust as a leader is holding yourself accountable to the same policies and procedures that you are holding your workforce accountable to. The other thing I'll say externally is I'll continue doing what I've been doing on this campaign trail, is I've been going across this whole county for over a year and a half, asking people what they want to see in the sheriff's office. One of the number one thing that people say is they want a sheriff that's present. They want someone that's going to show up and be there for them in times of crisis. And I'm pledging to do that as sheriff and to make sure that we are more present in the community. I also want to stop low-level traffic stops and the traffic stop quotas and cooperation with ICE in our county jail, because part of building trust is making sure that we are doing our best to protect everybody in our community. I also want to start a corporate accountability crimes unit, so we're supporting our workers when it comes to wage theft and tip theft and a host of other things, as well as prioritizing domestic violence. Building trust is really doing the work. As sheriff, after I win this primary, I'm going to start policy committees and hiring committees to make sure that the community is involved in this process. And I will simply be honest with the community, even when it's uncomfortable to do, and making sure that we are sharing our data and sharing our policies and training practices with the public. Because to build trust, you have to be honest and you have to be transparent. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask that we all take a breath, and I want to remind the candidates that we're going to focus on the issues and refrain from personal attacks. At this time, we want to prepare for our closing statements, and we'll be starting with Mr. Magee, then hear from Ms. Dyer and Mr. Jackson, then Mr. Jackson. So for your closing statement, you have up to 90 seconds. Mr. Magee.
Thank you very much. I don't consider what I heard earlier attacks. I heard them as facts. And that's what I'll say about that. My closing statement is I think it's very important that people have to understand here that experience is necessary to run a law enforcement agency. I think it's apparent as well when you take a look at the amount of drug deaths we've had, the amount of gun deaths and violence we've had. We don't have any real true crime fighting strategies here. The men and the women who work in the street, they do a great job. There's no question about it. But they feel that they don't get the support that they need. I've heard somebody say that, no, we're not perfect quite yet. Well, I'm looking at things and saying, if you've been doing it for so many years, why aren't we close to perfect? Why aren't we close when we take a look at all these numbers? And people are dying, folks. People are dying, people are getting shot, and there's no real solutions except for some of the things we've heard today, which I don't feel are going to be an effective solution. Why? It's a law enforcement agency. So at the end of the day, you have to take a look at the candidates. There's three of us. Two of them are heavy into social work and very little into law enforcement. Me, I'm a law enforcement veteran, and that's what this is a law enforcement agency. Have I engaged in community engagement? Absolutely, I have. But at the end of the day, I realize this is a law enforcement agency, and I want to keep people safe, and I want to protect you, and I want to make sure that we have a different approach to fighting crime in Washtenaw County, because people are tired of the crime and violence. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Dyer, your closing statement.
Yeah, what I'll say is I'm running for sheriff to truly create an office that will respect and protect our whole community. I worked there for 10 years. 7 years I was a road patrol officer. 3 years I worked in the Marine Division. I have dual graduate degrees from U of M in public policy and social work. And my day job now, I work as a therapist. I am really motivated and excited to bring a new administration into the sheriff's office to really change things, especially change the gaps that I saw. The programs that are going well, I'll keep. I support them. The We Live program, community violence intervention, all of that work I think is necessary. In fact, I think it deserves more support. But I also will prioritize mental health and wellness internally, make sure that we're boosting morale, make sure that we are not harming the community and combating the racial disparities that we see at the sheriff's office, and make sure that we're doing more to really meet people where they're at when it comes to what their needs are. And I'll give you an example of that with restorative justice. When I responded to a call in a community where a young person stole a lawnmower, and if I would have went the traditional route, that person would have had a felony. But we were able to work with the community to then get that young person to start a lawn mowing company. And it's things like that that keep communities safer and really build up safety in neighborhoods. And so I will do that. I work really hard. I'm from this community. I care deeply about this. I spent so much time at the sheriff's office, and I really want to make sure that our sheriff's office is an accountable, transparent agency for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Jackson, you're close.
I'll just say quickly, you won't hear me attacking my opponents ever. No one who volunteers on our campaign is allowed to do that, and why? We've been doing too much work. In 2 minutes, I got too much to say about here's what we've been doing and here's what we're going to do in the future. I'll just say the issues are too important and the stakes are too high just to play politics. We're talking about public safety, and politics and public safety do not go hand in hand. Some have said that the sheriff's office isn't here. Name me another police agency around the country that has an outreach worker unit, that has a support group for mothers whose kids are involved in the system, that works with folks who are on felony probation to keep them from going back to prison, that works at the bedside of folks who've been violently injured so that they don't go back and try and kill someone else, that has a lead program, a co-response unit, 24/7 crisis line. I could go on and on and on. Tonight I focused on what we've done in every question because I wanted you to know that when I say that's not enough, I'm not just making it up. It is not enough to do these small policy changes and even some of these large programs. We in Washtenaw County have to have the courage to invest in community and change the soil. Otherwise, it doesn't matter who's sheriff. You're going to always have to call 911 to deal with these small level symptoms instead of these really large community issues. Addiction, immigration, mental health, on and on and on, housing affordability. These are all public safety issues because people get entangled in the criminal justice system. I will end by saying thank you very much for our time here tonight, and I really appreciate all the great questions.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. I would like to thank all three candidates, Ms. Dyer, Mr. Jackson, and Mr. Magee, for their time tonight, and thank all of you for your participation and submission of questions. Carolyn Madden from the League of Women Voters and a UUAA Restorative Justice Committee will now provide our closing remarks.
The League of Women Voters, the Dispute Resolution Center, Restorative Justice, and UU-CIVs of the First UU Congregation of Ann Arbor, and the Washtenaw County Bar Association thank the candidates, timer, and the people who posed the questions for tonight's forum. And the League will be conducting a number of forums in the 2024 year for state, county, and local races. The League candidate forums are all recorded and are available for viewing on our website. Tonight's viewing will be recording. Sorry, will be ready in about a week for you to go onto the League's website. So if there are people who are unable to attend tonight, you can reference them to the League. And the website for the League is my.lwv.org, and look for the link to the programs. For additional nonpartisan information on candidates and ballot issues, go to vote411.org. Excuse me. The League's voter resource guide covering local, state, and federal candidates and current ballot proposals. Vote411.org. As a reminder, all voters are now eligible to cast an absentee ballot, and Michigan law provides for Election Day registration. Please vote in the August 6th election, and thank you, and have a good evening.